Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are today. My name is Julie James. I'm with Arnold Ventures, private philanthropy that's dedicated to tackling some of society's most pressing issues. I'm Vice President of the Criminal Justice Policy Team, and I'm joined here today by leaders that represent a variety of perspectives, all here because they care about the crisis that's happening and unfolding in our nation's prisons and jails. Before we turn to our guests and get introductions there, I just wanted to set the table a little bit by talking about what we're talking about, how it's unfolding, and then we'll turn to folks for their perspectives. So for those of you who are aware, we are in the midst of a profound crisis in our nation's correctional systems. You may have seen this campaign, Safer Prisons, Safer Communities, has put together a data brief that outlines the scale of the issue. One of the things that we now know is that the number of corrections officers working in state prisons has declined 20% over the period of 2017 to 2022. A lot of things have happened in that period, not least of which is COVID. But I think the thing to note is this crisis is getting worse at a time when we can scarcely afford it as a society, state budgets, families, people who are impacted, and corrections officers alike. These declines have really hit hardest in the places where the imprisonment rates are highest. And we know that officers have been falling in rates more quickly than corrections officers can be hired in to supervise them. And the short and long of it is that states are paying more for less. We're getting worse outcomes. This is all at a time when the federal government, as you all are no doubt aware, has canceled some important grants and support for states and local jurisdictions that are attempting to ensure safety for officers and incarcerated people alike. What is definitely a state and local matter largely, this crisis is of a scale so large and so important that a coordinated and multifaceted response is really needed. And so we're hopeful that the federal government will re-engage at some point soon because their help is needed. We're going to turn in just a moment to folks on the screen, but I think what's important to note is that this isn't impacting just incarcerated people or just officers or just leaders of those organizations, but it's impacting all of us. I will hear from about some of those details in just a little bit. In response to the crisis, we've been supporting a number of innovations in this space. But what we really thought was important to do was really to lift up the crisis, and via some partners who are on the screen today, One Voice United and Families Against Mandatory Minimums, FAMM, two of the leading organizations representing corrections staff on the one hand, and that's One Voice, and incarcerated people and their families on the other, and that's FAMM. They came together to launch this Safer Prisons, Safer Communities campaign to really draw attention to the crisis and to link arms. And for too long, these groups or these constituencies have considered their issues, their problems, and their solutions to be distinct. And what this moment calls for is really for all of us to link arms and work together to draw attention to the crisis and to think through solutions. A couple more introductory words. We're calling on policymakers to act now. Nothing can be off the table to address this crisis. We know that a lot is being tried, and our work at Arnold Ventures is to really lift up those innovations and try to evaluate them. But we really think everyone needs to come to the table and try everything that they can to address it. So as I mentioned, we are joined by leaders from One Voice United, Brian Dawe here on the screen, FAMM, represented by Daniel Landsman, as well as two other leaders who are working towards safety and wellness behind bars, Nneka Tapia Jones, Dr. Jones from Chicago Beyond, and John Wetzel, former Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections and Director of the Keystone Restituere Justice Center. I'm going to turn to you all now for brief introductions, and then we will dive into the content. Brian, can you introduce yourself, please?
Certainly. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending today. My name is Brian Dawe. I am the National Director for One Voice United. I started my career in corrections in 1982 as a state correctional officer in Massachusetts. One Voice United is dedicated to making sure that the voices of the men and women who do the job behind the walls every day have their voices heard at the table as we look to reimagine corrections moving forward. We must all work together to make this work. We're in a very bad situation right now, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here and share with you today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brian. Daniel, I'll turn to you.
Hi, yes, thanks, Julie. Daniel Landsman, I'm FAMM's Vice President of Policy. FAMM is a national sentencing and prison reform advocacy founded here in Washington, D.C. in 1991. We represent tens of thousands of incarcerated people and their families as we seek more humane prison conditions along with more proportional and effective sentencing laws. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Nneka?
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Nneka Jones Tapia. I'm the Managing Director for Justice Initiatives at Chicago Beyond. And Chicago Beyond is a national philanthropic organization that addresses systemic inequities by backing solutions that are led by people closest to the issues. I'm also a clinical psychologist who has studied the impact of jails and prisons on people's mental well-being for the last 20 years. And I worked in corrections for more than 11 years, most recently as the executive director of the Cook County Jail here in Chicago. Thank you all. Happy to join this conversation.
Thank you. Last but certainly not least, Secretary Wetzel.
No longer secretary, big headaches with those jobs. John Wetzel, founding board chair of the Keystone Restituere Justice Center. And if I'm involved in it, it has to have a weird name you Google. But Restituere simply means restoration. And I think that's our role in corrections. Before that, I spent 11 years, almost 11, as the longest serving Secretary of Corrections in the history of Pennsylvania. I started my career in 1989 as a CO0, part-time correctional officer in a county jail in Lebanon County. And now we're pivoting, both working nationally and locally on these staffing issues, and spent a lot of time really looking at the field from the middle. So excited for this conversation and appreciate Arnold to really call the question and continue to call the question, because it's urgent inside our facilities, and really appreciate, Julie, you guys being here in the fight with us, because it is a fight, and I appreciate you guys taking the lead on it.
Thanks for that unsolicited ad. Appreciate it. But we would be nowhere without our strong partners here. So I'm going to turn first to Brian again to talk to you about what is bringing you to this campaign. Why does it matter to your members? And why was it important for you to link arms with FAMM?
Well, I think one of the things that a lot of people misunderstand it, we may have different constituents, FAMM and OVU. However, we are all in the same environment. We are all intrinsically linked by the conditions of confinement. And until and unless the two largest stakeholders in the system, those who work there and those who live there, can be together at the table to address these concerns that are facing us all and our families, we fear that the last 150 years will continue to be repeated. We will continue the us against them attitudes that have put us in this incredibly bad situation that we are now. We need to join hands, as you said earlier, and address these universal concerns we have. Now, granted, there are going to be things we won't agree on, but we're going to have to be mature enough and to deal with those issues as well. But we need to get together and work on these important issues as far as staffing and programming and a whole host of other issues that impact all of us every single day behind those walls. We are very intrinsically linked, and there is no way to separate the two groups. We need to work together, or the system is going to continue its downward spiral to no one's benefit. It's critical at this point in time that these two stakeholders get together and move this agenda forward together. People need to realize that we're all in this. We're all members of this society. We're all going to be impacted by the final results, and we need to come together to make sure those results are positive for as many people as we can make it positive.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brian, for your voice and your leadership on these issues. I think, if folks have been following this issue, they will have seen your voice in articles saying things that I don't know that we would have expected to come out of folks representing corrections officers. So it's really refreshing and appreciated, I think, across the board. So thanks
Well,
for
Julie, let me say that it's
coming
very
out.
rare that people ask for our opinion. So we're extremely grateful this opportunity. It's very rare in my business that somebody will come to a correctional officer and say, "What's your opinion?" So we are grateful, very grateful to Arnold Ventures and this entire gathering. So thank you.
Well, we're hoping to change the norm, and I know that's your mission at One Voice United. So keep up the good work. I'll turn now to Daniel. And what's the motivation for FAMM? How does this link to your overall mission and goals, and why was it important for you all to partner with One Voice United?
Absolutely, thank you. And I think Brian really nailed it. As much as our constituencies are pitched as oppositional, forces, it's really not the case. There in a couple of years ago, and Brian, correct me, OVU put together a blue ribbon task force on corrections in America, and there's a quote from a correctional officer that has stuck with me since I read it, which is, "When it rains in prison, we all get wet." And that sticks with me for two reasons. One, because depending on what prison you are in, that could be a very literal statement. If you are in one of our federal facilities with leaking roofs, when it rains, everyone is going to get wet, quite literally. And just from a metaphorical standpoint, it sort of captures what brings FAMM to the table. This overarching understaffing issue, its tentacles spread to all of our constituencies, and not just our incarcerated constituents who lose access to visitation programming, long confinements to their cell, adequate nutrition, things like that, but to our family members who lose contact with their loved ones, who show up to visitation only to be turned away because there's not enough staff to run visitation that day. All these have compounding impacts on the psyche, the mental health, the physical health of our constituents. And from our, FAMM's Second Chance agenda, which seeks to provide people opportunities to come home early under excessive and extreme sentences, you need access to programming. You need regular functions at the prison to sort of rehabilitate and build up your case for early release. So it all has a compounding impact on basically every facet of FAMM's work.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn to John next, because I think of the correctional leadership as like the third leg of the stool, right? You've got families and impacted people. You've got the officers who are doing the day-to-day work, and then you've got the administrators who I think also have tensions with some of these other constituencies. John, how are you thinking about this crisis and the role of administrators?
Yeah, and certainly that's the primary view I bring to it, and I think we're looking at Nneka, the psychologist. I hate to go into psychology, but I think if we were building Maslow's hierarchy of needs for corrections, it would start with health and safety. And we're not delivering health or safety at the level we were pre-COVID. I mean, I think that's just a reality. And I think as leaders, we have to have the courage to say, we've tried all the solutions, we've tried stuff, and we've gotten incremental improvements in a lot of systems. People are doing very creative stuff, but I don't see lasting change. And I can tell you from a director's standpoint, you're waking up every morning at 3 a.m. to see if you still have a job or not. Some, depending on who your boss is, some more than others. And so this is something that's right in your face. But it's easy for us to throw numbers out and say generalities, but when you drill down to what it takes to deliver health and safety, it starts with healthy staff. And I think it's fair to say that people are less healthy generally after COVID. But I think when you think about a group who's not had any time off, didn't get the COVID lockdowns, didn't get to switch to Zoom meetings, rather had to Zoom around their jails, prisons, and states a lot more pre-COVID than during COVID. And then earlier, someone mentioned 20% reduction. Julie, I think that was you, since 2017. That 20% wasn't the newer people. We had a significant brain drain. So you lose experience. You now have people who are less healthy. And then the work conditions, because of the short staff, with people working double shifts, The thing we hear consistently, and Mike Thompson and I were fortunate enough to get a BJA grant and traveled the country looking at systems and talking to the stakeholder groups represented here. With officers, inconsistent schedules are just making their lives very difficult. And as other sectors are challenged, and that's the first thing we want to do, every sector's doing this. Okay, but this is a sector that has constitutional responsibilities to help people, not just constitutional responsibilities to incarcerate people, but public safety really means giving them the opportunity to address the behaviors to get back out. And as Nneka talks about, there's no difference between incarceration and community as it relates to our impacts. And so to not have the ability to do your job as an officer adds to that stress. It's called a need thwarting cycle. You get in the business to do something and to help people, and you don't have the ability to do it, and you're working inconsistent schedules. It's having impacts outside. And then that translates into more lockdowns, less programs. And so it impacts the incarcerated people. So I think it's really important that we talk about the specifics, because as the country has a break, we're falling off a demographic cliff with less and less people. Each sector is going to be competing for people. There's less and less in the work conditions, the living conditions. These are not conducive to a generation coming into the workforce who's mission driven and really cares about the outcomes of their work. So we have a perfect storm, and the trending is not going in a good direction anywhere. Incremental stuff is not going to do it. We have to fundamentally rethink the business model for corrections, not the business model in that we have an expectation, what's reasonable for corrections to do given the resources, and align corrections with the resources they have, or increase resources and strategies. Either way, we have to match supply and demand. And I think that's what's really missing. And these folks represent the impact of that.
Yeah. Thanks for giving us that systemic picture, because that is what needs to be on the mind of anyone, whether they're an administrator, an appropriator, a legislator, we hope, right, that is thinking about this systemically and in a moment that we need profound reimagination. And so here with some of that vision is Nneka, who represents in many ways all of these perspectives. And you've pulled that together into a vision for holistic safety. Would love to hear more about that and how you see that work intersecting with this campaign, this effort to raise awareness about this issue.
Yes, thank you, Julie. Always grateful for you and Arnold Ventures for bringing us into the conversation. You know, as everyone here has already articulated, that I will reemphasize is America's jails and prisons have trauma that is deeply entrenched within them. And that trauma impacts the staff, the people incarcerated, and the administrators, even though those groups tend to be at points of tension, as you mentioned. We recognize the similarity of the experiences of trauma. And the trauma that happens in our jails and prisons permeates through the walls, and it seeps into our families and into our communities. And so in 2022, Chicago Beyond partnered with One Voice United, Brian and Andy and team, as well as Just Leadership USA, to raise the red flag and say, wait a minute, we are all deeply impacted in a negative way by what is happening in jails and prisons. And we all deserve to have a seat at the table to affect change, shifting away from punishment, a system that was built to punish and built on retribution, to a system that centers wellness and safety for all of those groups. And so we developed the holistic safety framework to do just that. And as it relates to that, have been partnering with jails and prisons to help administrators to think about how they can make those shifts to focus on the safety and wellness of all of those groups. And here we are, you know, in this moment with 1.9 million people incarcerated, 350,000 correctional officers, 113 million adults in this country have had an immediate family member incarcerated. Like, those numbers alone requires all of us to join hands and form alliances to say we can't continue things the way that we've been. Even predating COVID, things were not good, and they're even worse now. And so I'm really happy to have Safer Prisons, Safer Communities campaign, also elevating this at the national level, and happy to join alliances with you all to say that we have to do things differently for the health and well-being of all of us.
Yeah, it's really going to take all of us and all of what we have. I'd love to turn a little bit deeper into the impact and what that looks like for people experiencing this crisis. And I'm going to do a little bit of a round robin again. I'm interested not just in dollars and cents, but that does matter, right? For policymakers, for taxpayers, we care about the return that we're getting on our investments in these institutions. I'm also interested in understanding the health, the human relational impacts as well. I'm going to mix it up a little bit and start with Daniel, if you can speak to what it looks like on the day-to-day, that how this crisis is unfolding and how your folks are experiencing that.
Absolutely. On a day-to-day, it may change, but there are some consistent issues that we're seeing. A big one, particularly at the federal level, use of augmentation. So what that policy is taking non-security prison staff and putting them into security roles. So taking teachers, nurses, therapists, and having them, monitor housing units. That has a cascading impact of pulling those folks away from the programming that they run. And so you have a lack of programming, rehabilitative opportunities for people inside. It also adds to the existing wait times for, urgent medical care, dentistry, checkups, outpatient care that they may need. So that's sort of on the day-to-day level. As it, grows and exacerbates, that's when we start to see things like visitation get canceled. And that can have a really deleterious effect on incarcerated people. We know that family ties are one of the biggest predictors of success upon reentry. And so pulling that away from their family members, and for the family members, some of whom, particularly again at the federal system, but in larger states like Texas and California, have to travel, maybe even book flights, book hotels to show up to find that visitation's canceled. That can be really harmful. And then taking it even larger, FAMM is seeing a really troubling increase in lockdowns and lockdowns that last for more than just a few hours, some lasting days, weeks, and I've heard of a few that have lasted multiple months. When a facility goes on lockdown, individuals by and large are confined to their cells for 23 hours a day. They may get recreation once a week. I've heard of people going 10 days without showers. Inconsistent access to their daily medication, inconsistent access to hot nutritional food. They may get food brought to them by carts, cold sandwiches, and things like that. Just some numbers to run by. In Illinois, the John Howard Association, a great organization that conducts oversight of the Department of Corrections there, in a report found that between fiscal years 2022 and 2023, that lockdowns increased by almost 280%. In fiscal year 2024, the DOC averaged 151 lockdowns per month. That is a very extreme scenario, but we're seeing that replicated at the federal system. A recent publication from 24 in the outlet Truth Out found that 33 states in the federal system had pervasive extended lockdowns over a 5-year period. So we are seeing an increase, both empirical and anecdotal from the outreach we get at FAMM. And lockdowns increase anxiety, depression, stress on both the family members of incarcerated people and incarcerated people, and have compounding impacts on the physical health and safety of folks. We know that drug use goes up during lockdowns. They don't have access to recreation. Tensions raise, particularly among cellmates or in dormitory facilities, where you may see more instances of violence and agitation. And so many of these lockdowns are administrative and not punitive, and related specifically to the fact that there just aren't enough staff to operate the facility at normal functions in that day. So that's that's a bit of the day to day and the month to month and week to week of the staffing crisis in our prisons.
Yeah, it really highlights the nature of that this is a crisis, and we were talking about a different scale and level of impact on people. Brian, and John, I've learned a lot about staffing and the impacts on shifts and stress and all kinds of really terrible health outcomes, outcomes for families of corrections officers. Would love to hear a little bit, Brian, first from you about the ways that this crisis shows up for folks, what you're hearing from your constituents.
We are truly at a breaking point. When we have correctional officers' life expectancies at 59 to 62, when we have PTSD rates at 34%, when we have people leaving the job, 54% of new hires leave within the first 18 months of being hired on, we're at a very, very dangerous tipping point right now. We have officers with divorce rates 39% higher than anybody else. We have officers that are working 2, 3, 4 doubles in a row, where you're required to work 16 hours, then try and get home, maybe get 3 hours sleep, get back and do another 16. There's a lot of reasons why they don't want to stay on that job, and what this is doing to their families as well, all the events they're missing, the children's soccer games, all of that, and then the tensions behind those walls, the hypervigilance that's needed to do that job every day. And when you have fewer staff and an increasing incarcerated population, those demands get greater. Every single thing inside a correctional facility is directly impacted by your level of staff. There isn't one thing that is not impacted by your staffing levels. And the fewer staff you have, the less programming you have, the less programming, the less visitation, the less opportunities for rehabilitation. That yanks up the tension even more. Again, to understand that officers are usually just the bearers of bad news. We don't make policy, yet we have to deliver those policies. We have to implement those policies, and we have to enforce those policies. And with fewer and fewer staff, that becomes more and more volatile a situation, unnecessarily volatile. It's not a situation any of us want to be in. I put it this way, Julie. We're all in a play right now that no one wants to play the role. No one wants to be the actor in this play, yet here we are. And we're in a very, very dangerous situation. Look at just the sleep deprivation problems alone. We're having officers that are dying on their way home from work, falling asleep at the wheel. This has gotten to a very crisis situation. And then when you combine that with what happens now to the morale and the attitudes behind the walls of those men and women incarcerated, it just ramps up everything for everybody. And it's getting very, very dangerous behind those walls right now. Staffing is critical. The incarceration population is now rising again while staffing goes down. We have to address this, and we have to address this now. And as a nation, we have several states right now with National Guard waiting to go in because there are not enough staff to maintain these facilities. And there's an entirely different attitude between someone who's been trained in the military and someone who's been trained as a professional correctional officer as to how you handle the incarcerated population, how you work with them. So we're in a very, very difficult situation right now, and we need your help. We need the help of everybody out there to listen closely. We need our politicians to get in behind these walls. Visit before you vote on these budgetary concerns. Look at what you're doing. I know FAMM has a similar program where they request that their politicians come in too. Take a look at these facilities. Tour these facilities. These are the biggest budget busters you have. Yet how many politicians actually take the time to go in and tour a facility? And I'm not talking about the warden's tour. No offense, John. I'm talking about going down and seeing the dungeons, seeing where it's really at. Talk to the officers, go in there, talk to the men and women incarcerated, and see what's going on before you vote less money for these correctional facilities, or come up with these wonderful ideas that haven't been tested or acted upon, or talk to the people and the men and women who are actually doing the job every day, or those living in those conditions. We need to all be at the table to address this problem right now. It's impacting the officers, it's impacting their families, it's impacting those incarcerated, it's impacting society. We're failing miserably. And when you put public safety as number one, yet you have a recidivism rate that's 82%, well, you're failing in that too. We may be doing okay while the individual is confined relative to public safety, but we're not doing the long game. And that's where it's really about. Sorry, I get very passionate about this. There's a lot.
Well, no, I mean, I think it's important that people understand how broad and deep this runs, Brian. I'm going to turn to John to ask, what would you add that hasn't been represented, or if you want to double click on anything. And I also know in your new role, you're really trying to help systems that are struggling with these issues. So from that perspective as well, would love to hear, how this is showing up for them.
Yeah, I appreciate Brian really leaning in about the importance of people getting inside. Mid 2015, we put a focus on this Council of State Governments Justice Center, getting people inside. And part of it is on the field, on people like me, leading from the last generation, not creating enough transparency. The opaqueness of this field puts us at a deficit with other fields. And I think when you talk about the impact and how it plays out, I think the first question in any other field, if you're talking about your surgeon, one of the questions that would be relevant is how do surgeons perform under stress, under certain environments? And you wouldn't even contemplate a surgeon working under the conditions correctional officers do. As a matter of fact, you wouldn't contemplate a bus driver or a truck driver. I know that because we have federal regulations that prohibit how many hours these people can work, but we haven't made that connection to corrections. And so when you look at the impact, I think at the local level, without a doubt, and I'm certainly looking at all three levels, the local level disproportionately, I think, is most impacted because it's health and safety of staff and also incarcerated people. And sadly, it's not only corrections, right? It's other fields. It's what used to comprise the safety net. And I think never in my career has there been a bigger gap between what everybody think is going on and what is actually going on. And if you add the models that we built and the assumptions that underlie the models we built, we have so much misalignment and it's killing people. So at the local level, we have people falling through the cracks who are on the behavioral health population, many of which, because of a lot of initiatives during the teens, are on Medicaid and are actually getting services in the community. When they come inside, that goes away and it goes on the county taxpayer dollar. But on top of that, any federal match does. And then when you start adding outcomes, and when you think in Pennsylvania in particular, as we're looking at counties, you think at synthetic opioids, methamphetamine, things that are much more difficult to detox from, that are driving up medical trips and those kinds of things. Don't lose sight of the fact that sicker individuals require more services, and less correctional staffing time eliminates some of the proactive identifications when people are doing bad. And so we're in this constant cycle at all three levels where we don't have enough resources to do the basics. If there's emergency, it draws so much that our very situation is building on itself. And then the other thing at the state level, which I think is a really important thing that people quantify, and what Mike Thompson and I are working on, this health and safety project, is to really figure out what is the relevant data that we can pull and understand how a system is performing, and get so we can get an understanding about what is a system capable of doing. And the pension, what we're calling the pension bomb, all the overtime over COVID, the pay increases, codifying the hero bonuses and those kinds of things, have given many correctional staff their 3 highest years. The incentives are in place, given the conditions inside, for people to retire the day they can retire at the state level and the local level. And this is a system that has lived off people working 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years after their retirement age. It's a real thing that people don't talk about, and it's invisible, and it's exacerbating the problems. But we can't even start unpacking a problem until we accurately quantify it. We ask the right questions. We have the right understanding of, from a human resource standpoint, and from what are these humans who are working here capable of doing, and then align the work to them. And I think that translates across all three. Financially, it's felt more at the local level, but playing out all three levels. And I think the urgency, I can't stress enough, the urgency, because it is really literally people dying, and we actually don't know how many. And I think that's the other end of it. How many is a direct result of that, even with the correctional staff, to capture that information after leaving, get our real good hands on a reality check. I think we need a reality check is what we need.
Yeah, I mean, we're investing in data infrastructure for that very reason. It seems crazy that we don't have that information. and we need it. I know UCLA Behind Bars database has put a lot into trying to track across the country deaths that happen behind bars, but it doesn't draw in the officer piece that you were just talking about, John. Nneka, we got to have some hope. Feel free to add to what has already been said if there are other things that you're seeing. But I know that you've done hands-on work with several systems to try to focus on safety and wellness across the board, and sort of what you're seeing at this stage.
Yeah, thank you. I promise to give us a ray of sunshine at the end of this, because systems are working, bringing these groups together to do some incredible things, even in trying times. But before I get to the ray of sunshine, I feel compelled to just highlight what we just heard from Brian, Daniel, and John, because I know that we are all passionate about what is happening in jails and prisons, and we have a lot of people who will watch this or are watching this who still don't know, and they don't understand the link between what we're talking about as a crisis within jails and prisons and what they experience sitting in their home watching this on a computer or on their phone. And so I want to just take a step back to just highlight that what you all shared is disconnection. Like what is happening in jails and prisons, staff and people incarcerated and administrators are disconnected from themselves and their health and wellness. It's deteriorating. They are disconnected from their families. Daniel talked about, visitation being disrupted. Brian talked about, staff not getting home to see their families. The same is true for administrators. I'm sure John will attest to the many days he spent not seeing his family. And we're disconnected from our communities. Like the system itself being opaque, it is separated from the community. That is the disconnection. And here's where the mental health component comes in. When people are disconnected, that can be traumatizing. And when people are overexposed to trauma, they see the world and the people in it as something to fear. When we walk around and we see danger in situations that really may not be dangerous, but that's our perspective when we have been overexposed to trauma from being in these systems, we are more likely to act out acts of harm because we are seeing the world and the people in it from positions of fear. And that goes for staff, that goes for people incarcerated, that goes for administrators, everyone who has direct contact with these systems. And so I want people to understand how, when we say what happens within these facilities permeates through the walls, like that is just one example. We're interacting with our community every day in grocery stores. I go to my kids' school. People don't understand the weight that we carry as members of this community that is locked behind the walls. And so when John talks about, like the model needing to shift, we really need to disrupt this phenomenon of disconnection and really think about how can we connect staff with themselves? How can we connect people incarcerated with themselves, giving them resources to help them to become emotionally and physically well? How can we connect all of these groups together so that we can take the expertise of all of the groups to really create change? And how can we bring families and communities together? And that's what we've been doing with our holistic safety initiatives. We've been partnering with 8 systems for the last 2 years, jails and prison systems. And by bringing together administrators, staff, and people incarcerated for this group to create the blueprint for the change that needs to happen, we have seen some incredible impacts. People are getting out of cell more, even with decreased staffing numbers, even with, decrepit facilities. People are getting out of their cell more and engaged in programming and engaged in activities so that they can connect to better ideas of what it looks like to be healthy and to be safe. Staff are getting more access to wellness resources. We have seen systems hire wellness directors to work with staff and hear what they say they need. It's important that we hear what Brian just said. He said we don't often get asked what we need or what we think. It's important that we ask staff and the people incarcerated what they feel they need to be well, and we deliver on that as a community, and that's what we're seeing systems do. And people are making healthier decisions, and healthier decisions are safe decisions. And so I want to applaud those 8 systems where we've seen these changes, and I know many of you are working in systems where you see these groups coming together and making some incredible strides in very difficult situations. And so just want to highlight the work that is being done to right-size this ship. But we also need our elected officials to not just come into the facilities, but to understand that the expertise on what is needed for change exists in those facilities, and they have to listen and act.
Thank you so much, Nneka. I'm seeing the light, and I'd love to see a little bit more and hear from the others of you about what is giving you hope. What are the solutions that other systems are trying, or policies that you think really could make a difference for folks? Daniel, I'm going to call on you first.
Sure. I've got a few thoughts, and just to go off the previous comments, and I know that empirical data still needs to be built around it, but I got the opportunity to visit Little Scandinavia, which John had a big hand in bringing online in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, and got to speak with both people incarcerated there and people who work there. It's a unit that takes a more Scandinavian approach. The incarcerated people have more control over their schedule. They can cook and exercise, and then they get fresh groceries and things like that. And talking with the correctional officer there, he mentioned at first he wasn't sure what he was going to think about it, but in his several months there, he's lost weight, he's gotten healthier. He's a lot less stressed at work, and some of the incarcerated folks reiterated similar thoughts. They're less stressed, they're happier, they feel healthier, they're eating fresher, they're exercising. They're sort of on their way to a better life within the confines of a prison cell. And so that was very encouraging, and I hope to see things like that. A lot has been made about the opacity of the prison system. These prisons are black boxes sort of dotted throughout the country, but we're seeing that get chipped away at with independent prison oversight. Just in the last year, Virginia and Maryland, or last couple of years, Virginia and Maryland have passed independent prison oversight bills unanimously. At the federal level, Congress last year passed the Federal Prison Oversight Act, unanimous in the Senate, and 2 no votes in the House, which I will never forgive or forget. And the president signed it into law. Of course, that bill now needs to be funded so that it can be fully realized, and I hope Congress will fund it in part of this upcoming appropriations process. But having these independent oversight systems that will bring more data and more transparency into what is going on in our prisons, allow independent bodies to show up unannounced and see, as Brian said, not the planned and scheduled tour, but the real state of affairs inside prison systems, and bring the public and decision makers a better understanding and knowledge of what's going on in prisons, to answer questions about how can we retain staff, how can we keep staff and incarcerated people healthier, what physical conditions are our prisons in. At the federal system, we have a $3 billion backlog, infrastructure repairs. I know this is supposed to be the positive side of the conversation, but flagging there are some major issues, and oversight may not be the direct solution to it, but it'll help us understand the problem before they become sort of intractable and difficult, if not impossible, to repair. And then finally, I would just touch on the continued movement for second chance legislation in the country. There's 2 ways to get at understaffing. Hire more, well-trained and appropriate staff members, and reduce the prison population. FAMM understands that we need to do both. Our expertise happens to lie in reducing the prison population, but we're continuing to see movement in that space. Compassionate release laws passing in the country. Maryland just passed both compassionate release and second look laws that will allow people serving either excessive sentences or sentences that are no longer appropriate given extraordinary and compelling reasons such as medical health, and get those folks out of the facility to better align our staff supply with the demand of the prison system. We also had a very natural experiment on the impact of home confinement, particularly at the federal level during the COVID-19 crisis. The CARES Act, passed by Congress in March of 2020, allowed the Bureau of Prisons director to place people on home confinement after serving 50% of their sentence. Previous to that, you could get up to 6 months or 10% of your sentence on home confinement. The BOP placed about 13,000 people, a little over 13,000 people on home confinement. You couldn't have paid for better recidivism results. Less than 0.5% of people who were placed on home confinement of the 13,000 were returned to prison for a new conviction. When you include people who were returned for non-criminal, technical violations of their conditions of home confinement, recidivism raises to only 4%. I believe we've got a 42% recidivism rate for the general population of BOP. So that's a very encouraging sign that, even if we can't get states to agree to resentencing or parole opportunities through second look or compassionate release, home confinement is very much an option, relieves the staff in the prison system, allows people who have shown to be low risk to public safety to serve the remainder of their terms on on home confinement, reduces the demand on our prison system, allows people to go back to their families. And I think there's some positive work ahead on that front.
Thank you. Yes, all important pieces of the puzzle, Daniel. I think, I don't know if the folks who are watching this are aware, but the dollars that we're spending on incarcerating people long past they pose any public safety risk are wasted dollars. At Arnold Ventures, we have a very high bar for research, and we are pushing for those dollars to be spent upstream where they can actually have an effect. We'd rather prevent crime than spend, really to keep aging folks behind bars. And I know that Brian and John have seen this firsthand. There are folks we know aren't going to cause any trouble when they leave, and we're wasting a lot of money. Would love to turn to John and then Brian on solutions that you all are seeing or are hopeful about before we close out.
Yeah, let me brag on some states. I mean, I think if opaqueness was one of the key contributors here, there's some leaders. Brian Collier in Texas, Ricky Dixon in Florida, and Dan Marticello in New York. 3 huge systems who are leaning into opaqueness and just being real honest about these intractable challenges and enlisting help outside the field to think differently. And I just think it is absolutely courageous in this environment. Ricky Dixon told at a budget hearing, said the incarcerated people have more experience than my staff. I mean, the kind of courage sitting in those seats to do that. And the Northeast in particular, I mean, Vermont, the demo, you hear him, vulnerable leadership is what I think we're looking for. Helen Hanks in New Hampshire, vulnerable leadership. We're seeing that a lot. At the local level, I see a lot of innovation. I'm working with Pennsylvania counties, and they're in worse crisis than any level, and they're coming up because of this with some really innovative challenges. Hopefully we can capture and share. I also have a university in town here in Pennsylvania who's really interested in trying to achieve alignment with counties all across the state and say, how should higher ed be supporting counties? So I think because of the financial situation, counties in Pennsylvania are like, tell us how we should be modifying these things. And so I think that's really exciting. And I have to leave with one warning. I think we should be very more so concerned with the federal system because you don't see a voice, you don't see an organization who's focused on from a professional development standpoint, the field. So at the county level, you see that. At the state level, you see it groups like CLA. You don't see it at the federal level, and opaqueness and those kinds of things, and also not having stable leadership. It is very urgent that we focus on BOP and the focus of DC and the feds in this context, where, as you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of destability. BOP cannot afford any more destability, period. They cannot afford any more destability at any one of these sites. They are on the edge, and in this is the very case where changes need to be deliberate, and we need to understand the unintended consequences that could have, because at the federal level, these places are a matchbox and they're getting ready to explode, and no one's arguing with that. And so I'll just wrap up by saying, I think the positive news on the federal level, on every level, you have consensus. There's nothing standing in the way. There's no politics standing in the way with improving the conditions inside jails and prisons, state and federal. No politics standing inside of it. So we need to get beyond the inertia and move it, because I think we're there. And the other thing is more of this death and dying on both sides of the bar, and more community suffering because of it.
Thank you, John. Brian, what are your thoughts on solutions that you're seeing that are giving you hope?
Well, first of all, let me say that we can't help anybody get well unless we are. And so One Voice is really focusing a lot on staff wellness programs, family wellness programs, bringing people up to speed with the damage that can be done and how to mitigate those damages. We're doing a lot of pilot programs on that front. We're also putting together a cultural assessment survey. One of the things I'm really proudest about of One Voice United is we don't assume anything. We have a lot of time in the business, myself, Andy, and the rest of the team. However, we don't assume to know this. We go into the field every day and talk to the men and women who are doing the job today, not yesterday like I did, today, and find out what their real problems are. So then we can develop solutions that address their problems, not the ones that we assume are there. And for way too long, as I said earlier, no one asked the workforce, what are the issues here? We, in all honesty, Julie, we are the best consultants there are. We've been viewed as a roadblock. We're not roadblocks, we're the building blocks. Correctional staff will have to be involved in the development and the change of this culture, or it will not change. And no one realizes the necessity for change more than we do. And that's why I'm so bolstered by the future. Because as we meet with more men and women across the country, as Andy brings us together and more leaders coming around from across the country, the realization is becoming evident to everybody. We all need to act together. And to see that revelation, to see the realization through groups like, I don't know if you're aware of what we've done with B2B, Barriers to Bridges. And when we've had multiple correctional staff meet with formerly incarcerated to look at the problems we're all facing that are endemic in the system and how do we address them together. And to see those two groups come together 10 years ago, if you had told me that was even a possibility, I would have laughed at you, unfortunately, because I didn't think it was ever possible. So I guess one of the positives of the crisis we're in is the realization that we need to come together or this is going down, and no one can afford that to happen for the health or well-being for anybody. So I guess I'm bolstered by the realization that the time has come that we all have to put our heads together to get this over with and to stop the us against them attitudes that's doing nobody any good. We're all in this together. We're all parts of this society. We're all going to benefit or all going to suffer by the results of what we do with this system.
There is truly no time like the present. Now is the time, and we are all coming together. We are here for it. As we look ahead, I want folks who are watching to know that all of us on this screen are in our own ways and together doing our level best to contribute to solving what is this enormous crisis. And I just want to give folks a moment to share some of the things that they would like you to know about. And I'll start by saying I hope that you will visit the Safer Prisons, Safer Communities website. That's saferprisons.safercommunities.org. To subscribe to the email newsletter so you can keep up to date on the activities of the campaign, of the stories that we're seeing and the solutions that we're putting out, and to follow us on social media. We're really looking for partners to really think differently about how we can solve this problem, really putting research together with expert practitioners and those impacted to envision a better tomorrow. So I'm going to go back to Brian and ask you again to share a little bit about what you're thinking about, folks, what folks should know about as they leave today.
Well, I think I don't want to leave on a negative, so I'd like to get some hope. The fact that we are in this chat together, the fact that organizations like FAMM and OVU and Chicago Beyond and John's group can come together and realize that we have to work together to make these things happen, to make the cultural changes we need. And this is going to need a cultural change. We have to shift from this us against them dynamic that's held us back for 150 years. And we have to move forward with an us dynamic. All of us have to realize that we are in this together. And One Voice United is working across the country, and we will work with anybody who wants to work with us to move the system forward. It doesn't matter the background. It doesn't matter what your motivation is, as long as it makes a positive impact on the system as we have now. We want to work with you on that. And we continue our work across the country. And we also ask that you support unionism across the nation, because that's one of the ways we have the voices heard. Absent type of employee associations and things like that, we can't get the voices of all these men and women heard the way we need to. So we hope you support that. And we hope you support having your legislators make sure they go to the prisons and ask them. Go to your prisons and find out what's going on inside those walls before you vote again on a budget that either detracts from that system or adds to it. But get the knowledge out there. Let's do the research together. Become more and more aware of what's going on. $88 billion a year in taxpaying dollars are going down to this right now. And none of us are happy with the results. When we have the rates we have of recidivism and we have lack of retention in staff, it's failing at every corner. And we need to work together. And that's my biggest hope, is that we will continue this. If anything comes out of the crisis we're in, it will be that we emerge from this together stronger.
I have to believe that. Thanks for those words, Brian. Nneka, can I turn to you? What's one thing people should know, do, or say?
Sure. So Chicago Beyond has seen a lot of momentum with bringing together groups such as this, administrators, people formerly incarcerated, and correctional staff through our partnerships with One Voice United and JLUSA. And we invite anyone who is listening to this to join that movement. Contact us at chicagobeyond.org. All of the people who are on this call has been a part of that movement, and we invite others to join. We're going to be hosting our second annual National Justice Convening in October in Chicago. Everyone loves Chicago. And so we invite you to get in touch with us to learn how you too can attend.
Thank you, Nneka. John?
Yeah, well, we launched Keystone to work with leaders who wanted to do courageous stuff in impossible fields. And so that's why we're in corrections and foster care. So if there's any leaders out there, hit me up on LinkedIn. I have a lot of conversations with a lot of you. Please reach out, DM. This field's in crisis, and what we're really doing, all of us, is just collecting the kind of courageous leaders who want to take these problems on directly and do it collectively. Doing it in a group is the kind of protection. But we as a field, we need to be the authors of our own change. And if we're not, we're going to get change imposed on us, which most of us in the field have complained about. Now you have an opportunity, but change is, I guess someone said change is not required because survival, or change isn't necessary because survival is not required. But we're not going to survive the current track. And so you can see a growing a group of constituencies, not quite a coalition, but getting there. Reach out, any one of us, and let's pull it in, and let's have a voice for all of us, and understand that corrections does count, and it's really important at every level of government. Let's get some focus on it and get us back on track.
Thanks, John. Daniel?
Yeah, thank you. I have to reiterate the call to visit prisons, especially for our political leaders, our elected officials. I would also just encourage everyone to maintain a holistic and comprehensive view of this problem. Like I said, there are two ways of getting at the staffing crisis: more correctional staff and lesser demand on our prison system. And so particularly on the latter, if you are working in a state and you are interested in independent prison oversight, or creating mechanisms through which we can safely bring people back home, be it through second look, compassionate release, home confinement, what have you. As John said, reach out to me on LinkedIn, or reach out to FAMM, our website, famm.org, FAMM.org. And I'm just so grateful to be here with everyone here today.
Thank you so much. So with that, we are going to wrap up. Thank you all so much for joining me today, those of you on the screen and those of you in the viewing audience. It's going to take all of us, all of what we've got, So let's go. Thank you.